Welcome everybody. In today's video, we are going to talk about how to show understanding. This is a subject that is often challenging for new university students, but it is something that we teachers look for the students to understand automatically without us explaining it very carefully. So this video is an attempt to help you to see what we expect you to see. So there's a common conversation that we see with university students and teachers. The teachers will feed back to a student, your analysis is very weak. The student will not understand and they'll say, why? Why is it weak? The teacher says, you need to do more critical analysis. The student says, but I don't know what analysis is. What is analysis and what makes it critical? The teacher, thinking the student is being lazy, says, go and read more. The student says, read, just tell me what you want. This is a very common conversation that I see teachers having with students every day. Students need to remember that at university, they are supposed to be independent learners. And when they don't know what analysis is, they're supposed to go read what analysis is. When they don't know what makes it critical, they're supposed to go read and figure out what makes it critical. Don't ask the teacher to take you through step by step for everything. The teacher has many, many students, usually hundreds of students, and in some cases, thousands of students. The thing to remember here is that you always need to have support for your opinions. So when you are writing something or when you're presenting, it doesn't really matter in this case if you're writing or presenting, but some of your writing should be your thoughts. These are your opinions, what you believe to be true. And we don't say, I believe, or I think so, or in my opinion. We don't say that because it is not about our belief or our opinion. It is about the evidence indicates that something is true. If you say, in my opinion, well, then it's not really wrong, but it would be very, very silly to say, in my opinion, 2 + 2 is 4, right? Because it's not based on your opinion. I mean, if it's really your opinion, then you could say, in my opinion, 2 + 2 is 5. And because it's your opinion, it's not really wrong. But actually 2 + 2 being 5 is wrong, and we all know it's wrong. So we go by the evidence, not by your feelings. So some of your writing should be your thoughts, but all of those thoughts need to be supported by the work of others or by logic. And we'll talk about this more later on. But the point here is you need to support your opinions with evidence from recognized people. Once you become a recognized expert in a field, you can give your opinion without support from other people. You will often see talks given by experts where they don't cite others. And that's fine because those people are experts in their field and they are just giving their opinions from their own expertise. But as a university student, normally you will not have that recognized expertise unless you have published several papers in a field. Then you should just focus on this. Give your opinion and support that with evidence. Now, here's the goal here. When I say support it with evidence, the idea is you read some papers, you read some research papers, and you read the first paper and it shows you that women earn less money than men for doing the same job. And then you read a second paper and it shows you that workers value recognition above salary. And then you read a third paper and it shows that salary actually fulfills many needs. If we look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, for example, salary fulfills the needs of food because you need money to buy food, but salary also fulfills the need for recognition. And that is by earning more money, people feel recognized for being great because they're being paid more money. So now your opinion is how you pull these three things together to make some thought. And it's not in your opinion. We say, okay, women earn less than men, people value recognition, salary fulfills the need of recognition, then we might conclude, our opinion might be, women are more likely to quit than men because they earn less, and people see that salary represents recognition, and so women feel less recognized than men. It's not just that women need money to survive, which of course they do, but even if they're married and they have a very rich husband, they still need money for recognition of their own effort. That's the point of author C. And so your opinion is pulling these three things together. Now, when we look at Bloom's taxonomy, this is a well-regarded taxonomy. A taxonomy means a system for categorizing a concept, an idea. In this case, we have how do we categorize the skills of thinking by students. And so Bloom came up with this taxonomy. It's been used for a long time. It is still widely used today. And the easiest one is remembering, understanding, applying, and it goes all the way up. So if you want higher grades, then you need to show higher order thinking. Higher order thinking is higher in this list. And that higher order thinking is more difficult. And so more difficult thinking gets rewarded with higher grades. If you just show that you remember something, that's very easy. And so the grade is very low. At the university level, often remembering is fail. I mean, it's not even good enough to pass. But creating is very difficult. In fact, it is the most difficult, and therefore we generally award the highest grades for it. There's a very famous saying in English, which is, it is easier to criticize the inventions of others than to create something yourself. And that's true, and that's shown here. Evaluating, which would be criticizing others, is a lower level thinking than the thinking that is required to create something new. So what do we mean when we say remembering? Remembering has these keywords, right? When you look at a task verb that you are given on an assignment task or an assessment, an exam task, anything like that, you may have the keyword name, describe, write, tell, list, relate, state, define. Any of these tell you that actually what the teacher is looking for is to see if you can remember something. Generally, you either know it or you do not. A typical question looking for remembering would be, recall the bottommost layer in Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And your answer might be, the lowest level in Maslow's hierarchy of needs includes physiological needs like food, water, and shelter. You remember it. Does it mean you understand it? No. But it means you remember it, and so you've met the requirement of this task. If we want to move up to higher grades, we need to show higher levels of understanding. And so after remember, we get to the level of understanding. Here you'll see task verbs like explain, predict, translate, compare, outline, discuss, summarize, restate. All of these are trying to show, does the student understand or not? You may remember without actually understanding. An example question would be, summarize what happened when Toyota introduced the Prius in the US. The real question here is, does the student understand what happened in this event? And so you need to make sure that you show that. Of course, this requires more words. Here's a good example. A good example is, Toyota introduced the Prius to the US car market by sending 4,000 of them to America in the year 2000. And I know this because of Smith in 2001. However, at the time, there was no clear desire that American consumers were interested in anything other than traditional gasoline-powered cars. Toyota took a big chance, but they were successful. They actually sold out of the initial supply of Prius cars very quickly, and the American public started asking why Toyota did not send a larger initial supply. Toyota responded that there was no indication that Americans were interested at all in hybrid cars, but they would make more. This shows clear understanding. There's lots of details. And the student is not simply paraphrasing one author's work. So any teacher would look at this and say, yes, clearly the student knows what happened. A bad example would be Toyota introduced the Prius in the US in 2000. US car buyers liked it, Toyota was successful. There's very few details here. There's just one fact, and it's not supported with citation. So the teacher is left wondering, is the student copying this? Are they guessing? Does the student really understand? And the fact is, in this answer, there is not enough evidence that the student understands. So the teacher is going to assume that the student does not understand. The teacher does not assume that the student knows everything unless they mess up. The teacher assumes that the student doesn't understand until the student shows that they do understand. Now, if we move up to a higher level and we go to applying, here you're going to see words like use, illustrate, classify, show, complete, solve, or examine. The question here is, can you use an idea in a situation? For example, apply Porter's 5 forces to the computer manufacturing industry, something like that. And the goal is to test the student's ability to connect the ideas of whatever is being applied, the theory or some theoretical model, and to connect that to real world problems. This shows much deeper understanding than simple understanding. Here you might have a task like show how Superbank could use the Andre change management model to implement a new quality management system. And then here is an example of an answer. It's a bit long. The point here is the student talks about how the Andre change management model, they cite it, supports a company going through 3 phases, how it's iterative, it operates within a larger framework, and then it goes in with great detail about everything in here. And then at the end, it talks about bytes, which was a part of the model. For the first byte, we will have the standard 3 phases again. The first phase of this small byte is planning what will change. Now, according to the model, workers should be deciding this as they are in the best position to know what needs to be done. And we go through this step by step. Now, in this case, you're applying. Sometimes when you're applying, you will need to reference the work of other people. That's always a great idea. But sometimes when you're applying, you do not need to reference the work of other people, and the teacher can still see if you have understood the model deeply enough to be able to apply it in the real world. So in many cases, applying does not require many citations. But if we move up to level 4 and we get to analyzing, for analyzing, things become a little bit different. So the key words that you would look for the task verbs are compare, contrast, explain, examine, investigate, identify, or categorize. One of the things that we do here is we identify the component parts of a complex concept and how those component parts interact. And everything here has to have proper support. So when you identify the component parts, how do you know those are the component parts? You need to get that information from literature, not just because you think so. How do the component parts interact? You need evidence that those interactions are true, and that needs to be supported by literature. This is why when we start getting into analysis, you need to use a lot of references in your work to support your points. Here's an example. The task is explain the process of handling a customer return. I'll just read this to you. Customers return things for various reasons, including simply not being satisfied with its fitness for use. Page 2018. When a customer enters a store to return an item, the first step is to assure the customer that the company understands the customer is not satisfied with the product. Smith, 2019. If the company will give a cash refund or will only give store credit, that should be indicated to the customer straight away in order to remove any concerns the customer might have about what is going to happen. Jones, 2018. The next step is to find out the underlying reason the customer was unhappy with the product. Smith, 2019. This should be done after you have already confirmed to the customer they will receive a refund or store credit. Adams, 2019. The reason for this is that if you ask before, the customer may not answer based on honesty, but rather based on a calculation of what will get them the refund they desire. Baker, 2020. Now, in this case, we have a complex idea of handling customer returns, and we've broken that complex idea into component pieces, and we have described how those components interact with each other. So when we're talking about analyzing, this is what we are talking about. Something that may help you to understand in a simpler way when we say, what is analysis? Analysis is we take a complex idea. For example, choosing a spouse. Spouse means a husband or a wife. So you want to choose a spouse. What do you think about? What do you consider? What are the components of that choice? Well, very often when we look at the components, we might see that the literature shows that people consider wealth and income and family background, and education, reputation, looks, race, many things. Again, all of these points need to be supported by literature. Now, these are all the component pieces, but we still need to think about how do they interact with each other. So in this case, we can see, well, wealth and income are clearly going to interact. In fact, income will lead to wealth because the higher your income, the more money you can save. Will wealth lead to more income? Maybe not. So it may be a one-way relationship. Wealth is probably connected to education in a two-way relationship because the wealthier your family is, then probably the more education you can afford. And also the higher education you achieve, the wealthier you will become. And so we might also see that looks connects to race, as people who are concerned about race often see that one race might be more attractive than another race. Now again, all of the relationships and all of these components need to be connected and supported by literature. These cannot just be our opinion, our thoughts. This is about what does the literature say, but this should help you to see what we mean when we talk about analysis. Now let's move up to the next level, the level 5, evaluating. Here we look at words like rate, choose, assess, prioritize, justify, decide, recommend, or you might see the word evaluate. When we talk about evaluating, we do not mean to report. To report is to say what happened. That's more like describing, which is more like remembering, maybe understanding, but it's definitely not evaluating. Evaluating means it's like to judge if something is good or if something is bad. So in order to know if something is good or bad, basically what we mean is it will either help you get to your desired goal or it will not help you get to your desired goal. So we need to know what is the desired goal. If you are studying business, very often the desired goal of a business is to increase profits. And if that is your desired goal, then something is good if it helps to increase profits, either directly or indirectly. And if it leads to reduced profits, directly or indirectly, then it is bad. Now you might have a social enterprise where profits is not the primary goal, where serving a societal need might be the primary goal and profits might be secondary. Or you might have an NGO, a non-government organization, where profits are not even an issue at all and only serving the organization's priority, the goal, the objective, is what's really concerned about. We need to make sure that whatever actions that the organization is taking, do those actions logically lead to the goal? For example, students going out, partying all the time, does that lead to the goal? Well, it depends on what their goal is. If their goal is to make memories that they can look back on, maybe yes. If their goal is to get higher grades, maybe no. If their goal is to make more friends, yes, but they are going to make friends that like to go out and party all the time, not friends that like to perform better academically. So we need to make sure what is the goal, and are these going in the right direction? For this, we also need to be careful of something called outcome bias. You can research that on your own, but the point here is we must evaluate decisions. We don't evaluate outcomes. There's a typical example where, let's imagine I say, you give me $10 and we will flip a coin, heads or tails. And if it lands on heads, then I will give you 100. And if it lands on tails, I will give you nothing. So you have a 50-50 chance to make $10. Sorry, you have a 50-50 chance to make 100 by paying $10, which sounds intuitively pretty good. So the person places the bet. They bet the $10. They flip the coin and it comes up tails, and they lost their $10. And now we need to evaluate the decision to bet the $10. Many students would say it was a bad decision because they lost their money. However, that is outcome bias. When the person made the decision, they had no way of knowing the outcome, and therefore we cannot consider that. All the person knew was they had a 50-50 chance, assuming it's a fair coin, they had a 50-50 chance of earning $100 by betting $10. Now, actually, that is a very good decision. And if you could make that decision many, many times, you will win over time, although on any one flip of the coin, you might lose. But that's the point here. Be careful of outcome bias, where we look at the results of the decisions rather than how the decision itself was made. We don't expect people to be able to predict the future or to know the future for certain when they are making their decisions. Now, here's an example. So the task might be evaluate your team's performance. You might say, well, according to Shanahan in 2001, the proper judgment of team performance should consider 4 elements: inputs, outputs, process, and structure. The structure of our team was quite strong. We set up rules for achieving as well as maintaining membership, as well as accountability standards, as Walters, 2011, advised. All 4 members of the team contributed to the design of the structure as well as performing their tasks as recommended by Darby in 2019. Assignments were not individually determined, but rather determined for each member by the group as a whole, as shown by Ortega in 2021. This increased the commitment of the group as a group to ensure that each member actually performed adequately, as shown in Orleans 2020. In the end, we found that each member was able to complete their task on time, with one exception. That exception stemmed from a personal issue for that member, and we believe that will not be repeated. In short, the team performed quite well. Now, this is basic judgment against an academic standard, Shanahan's standard, supported by other literature as well. It would be better if more details were included, but it's already pretty good. It's already pretty good. A bad example of evaluating, same task, evaluate your team's performance. For this paper, I interviewed my father, who is a manager at a local manufacturer. He said, the most important way to judge a team is simply to see if everyone is happy. We were all happy at the end. Therefore, I can say that our team's performance was quite good. This is not a good evaluation. The judgment is done against a non-academic standard. Now, very often you can use industry standards as opposed to academic standards. However, this person's father, there's no indication that they are an industry leader, and therefore there's no reason to believe that the father's opinion is an industry standard. It is just the father's unsupported opinion. So use either an academic standard or a recognized expert from industry, not just somebody who's a manager. Now, when we get to the highest level, this is generally how we get the highest grades, by focusing on creating. Keywords we're looking for here is invent, create, design, plan, imagine, compose, or construct. An example might be, imagine another style of leadership other than the 6 proposed by Goleman. So there very often undergraduate students study Goleman's 6 leadership styles, published in 2000 in Harvard Business Review. So this is just telling you, create another one. Create one that's not covered by his. Another example is design an organizational structure or culture where nobody would be able to use coercive leadership. Now, I'm not going to give you an example answer for these, but you can be assured that the answer is going to be very long, is going to be very detailed as you give your opinions of why this leadership style is a good leadership style and not one of the 6 proposed by Goleman, or why this organizational structure would achieve this goal and why it would not be open to weaknesses or things like that. But that's what creating is. Creating means you need to create. Now, when we look at descriptive versus critical analysis, when we look at this picture, for example, and we see this mail truck and we see what is the matter with all of these houses, can you guess what is the matter? Why are all these houses tilted? Is it because there was an earthquake and all the houses were tilted, or is it because of something else? Well, as it turns out, actually the picture is tilted. So actually the truck is going uphill and the houses are perfectly normal. So the point here is when we look at critical analysis, it is about being able to show that you understand something from multiple perspectives, not just from a single perspective. Perspective is about how do you see something. Painters often use this idea of perspective. As you can see in this museum where something painted on the wall looks like the girl is pouring water out when actually it's just a painting on the wall. To describe means to report something, to talk about something, but to be critical means to do it from more than one perspective. Could be 2 or 3 perspectives, or maybe even more, but generally you have a limited amount of space. Critical also means to question everything. Just because one person says it's true doesn't mean it's true. So we want you to be able to see that. Even your teachers, even we recognize that oftentimes when we explain something to our students, we don't give the full complex understanding that we have because the students aren't ready for it. And if you can show that you do understand that more complex version, that's great. Don't worry that you are going to hurt the teacher's feelings by showing the teacher didn't fully understand something. The teacher understands far more than they can explain during one lecture session. An example here. Smith in 2001 wrote that workers care very little about money. But you should think about this. If you think, wait a minute, I'm in Vietnam and everybody I know cares about money. The only thing everybody's talking about is money, 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 money. So when Smith says workers care very little about money, and that goes against your experience, spend some time exploring that. If your experience is different, don't just take the simple answer of, yes, Smith said this, so it's definitely true, because all that shows is that your thinking is very simple, right? If Smith is from England, then maybe money is less important in the UK, but maybe it's more important in Vietnam. Maybe because the minimum salary in the UK can support life comfortably, but in Vietnam, the minimum salary can't support life comfortably. And so show that you understand that complex thinking. Question the things that people say. Another thing we'll talk about is descriptive analysis, especially descriptive versus critical analysis. So descriptive analysis, which is just describing, compare different leadership styles in different situations. According to Goleman, in 2000, there are 6 leadership styles. Coercive leadership is where the leader demands immediate compliance. This style has a negative overall impact on the company's culture. Democratic leadership is when the leader allows the followers to be involved in making decisions. The task was to compare different leadership styles in different situations. There was no situations. There was no comparison at all. The person simply described coercive leadership and then they described democratic leadership. That's not a comparison. Better analysis would be this. Of Goleman's 6 leadership styles, coercive is best used during times of crisis. The leader does not have time to involve everyone. When not in a crisis, leader wants to build the team, they can use coaching where you train the followers, which makes those followers into leaders. It's good, it's better because there's situations, but there's still no comparison. This is quite long. I'll let you pause the video and read it on your own, but you should be able to see how there is only one situation here, but it does clearly compare using coercive leadership and using democratic leadership. So pause the video now, read this and see. Can you see how that is being compared? This might help you to see how these are being compared. So we can see Goldman's cohesive leadership will demand immediate compliance. The reaction of the company is quick. That's the positive side of coercive leadership. The negative side in red, it is more likely that the optimal solution will not be found. Then we have a second leadership style, democratic leadership, would bring the followers into the decision-making process. The bad thing is it slows down the decision-making. The good thing is it improves the quality of the decisions. Yes, there's only one situation, and we should have different situations. But at least in this one situation, there's a very clear comparison between these two. When you are making recommendations, and this is all related to showing your understanding, and this is really about what's driving your grade. So when you're making recommendations, you need to remember that it cannot just be your unsupported opinion. You cannot simply say, I recommend that the company pays people more money. Well, if you're not a recognized expert in the field, and you're recognized as an expert when you've published research papers or books on the field, if you're just a student and you haven't done that yet, then you need to be supported. Your opinions need to be supported by experts. So this requires a lot of research, which means you need to do a lot of reading. And one thing to understand here is that something that may not be obvious to you is extremely obvious to your teacher. Because while you may write 8, 10, or 12 papers during a semester, maybe you write 20 papers per year, your teacher is reading hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of papers every year, and maybe they've been doing the job for 10 years. So they've read 5,000, 10,000, 20,000 papers. So when your paper comes across, they compare it in their mind to those 20,000 other papers that they've read. So they know where you're at. It's extremely obvious how much research you've done. A bad example of a recommendation is Porsche should stop all of their dealers from discounting. Now, this would be a thing of how do you improve Porsche's reputation when dealers discount Porsche cars? Bad example is Porsche should stop all dealers from discounting. But then the question is why? Why is that a bad example? A student who has not done much research may think that this is a good recommendation. But it's not a good recommendation because this is actually illegal. It's illegal in the US and it is illegal in many other countries. It is called price fixing. It is interfering with the free market, and it is absolutely frowned upon and will be punished by the government. Another bad example is, well, Toyota should create a quality system, like a quality management system. That sounds great, except for it shows the teacher that you have done no reading at all, because if you did any reading about quality management systems, you would know that Toyota is extremely famous for their quality management system called the Toyota Production System. And so in your recommendation, the way you avoid these problems is make sure you include lots of detail and lots of support. And you may realize that as you are writing and as you need to find the support, you may find that the support does not exist. And that's fine. As long as you find the problem before you submit, then you can still fix it. If you find it after you submit, it can be very bad. So it all comes down to this idea of academic argument. Academic argument is it's the foundation of academic writing. You have your opinion and you have your evidence. I believe this, and this is why I believe it. And we always have to have the evidence. We can either have the evidence before the opinion, or we can have the opinion before the evidence. If we have the evidence before the opinion, we say, well, all CEOs are human, shown by Smith in 2002, so Apple's CEO is human. Or it can be the other way. Apple CEO is human since all CEOs are human. Smith in 2002. They say the same thing, it's just the order is different. Both are fine, no problem. When we talk about evidence here, we either need citation or we need logic. The logic needs to go back to either citations or a fact that is either widely accepted or universally accepted. For example, you don't need to cite the fact that the sun rises in the east. Everybody accepts that. You don't need to cite the fact that the earth is round, because although it is not universally accepted, because some people believe that the earth is flat, it is widely accepted. Most of the world's population believes that the earth is round. And so you don't need to cite that the earth is round. You can just use that in your argument. But if you want to say that this is true because the earth is flat, that is not widely accepted. And so you need clear evidence. And there is a very famous quote, which is, really extreme claims, like the earth is flat, require really extreme evidence. You need to show me that the earth is flat. For example, launch a rocket up into space and take a picture of the flat earth. Here are some examples of academic argument. Steve Jobs was a coercive leader. This is very weak. It is just your opinion. There's no supporting evidence. Maybe he was, maybe he wasn't. And if you say, in my opinion, Steve Jobs was a coercive leader, it doesn't make it a stronger argument. It's still just your opinion. There's no reason for the teacher to believe that at all. That's very, very low, simplistic thinking. A little better would be, actually, this is not better. This is just as bad. Steve Jobs was a coercive leader. He was the CEO of Apple and well known throughout the world. Okay, yes. For most people, we would say that he was the CEO of Apple and well known throughout the world. That is a commonly well-known fact, a commonly accepted fact. However, the problem with is that the evidence is unrelated to the opinion. Being the CEO of Apple does not mean that he was a coercive leader. It may mean that he was a leader, he had a leadership position, but that doesn't mean he was coercive. Here's another one. Steve Jobs was a coercive leader. He was the CEO of the world's largest company, which was famous for building great products. Great products come from paying attention to details, so Jobs was always making all the decisions. Okay, it's better, but it's still weak, because Apple might pay attention to details as a company, but Steve Jobs might not have done that. So how do you know that Steve Jobs paid attention to details? There might be other reasons for the company's success other than people paying attention to details. So there's many other explanations, so you really need to have some more references here. Here's a better one. Steve Jobs was a coercive leader. He always made every decision about every little detail and every process and would often scream at anyone who would fail to do what he ordered. This is better. This is much better because the supporting evidence relates directly to the opinion. The opinion is that first sentence, Steve Jobs was a coercive leader. And the evidence is from the authorized biographer of Steve Jobs, a guy named Walter Isaacson. And Walter Isaacson is very well respected for his biographies. He's written many and he's been very successful with them. So this is a good argument, unlike the others, which are really not. So argument, we need two things, right? We need our opinion, which we get from reading a lot, thinking, and then we need our supporting evidence, which we also get from reading a lot, which is why we always need to remember university students are expected to read a lot. If you have an argument without evidence, all you have is opinion that's not supported. We call that unsupported opinion. Unsupported opinion at the university level is usually a failing grade. So make sure you are supporting whatever opinions you have. You're welcome to have whatever opinions you want, but you need to have support for those opinions. So how do we find the right answer? Students always look for this. I see so many times that students, especially students in a country like Vietnam, where they've grown up through systems where they've been taught to remember, simply memorize what the teacher has said and then put that back on the test and everything is fine. The problem is, if we have a math question, like what is 2 plus 2? Well, there is only one right answer. 2 plus 2 is 4, and everybody will accept that. Well, everybody who's reasonable will accept that. But if we have a different question, like what style of leadership is best for innovation, there is no one right answer. It depends on the argument you make. As a person who has read a lot myself, I could argue for several different types of leadership that would lead to the best innovation. Your task is to make an argument. And we're not looking for which style of leadership did you choose, but how well did you support your opinion with evidence. That's what we're looking for. Students often see this question, what style of leadership is best? And they think, I need the one right answer of what style of leadership is best. But actually, that's not the question. You need to make an argument on what you believe is best. The teacher simply wants to see how deeply you understand, how complex is your understanding. Now, you should think about what should you write? How much should you write? Whatever topic you're studying, like if you're studying leadership, might have 50 topics or so. The lecture might have just included 5 of them. But if you're serious, then you probably went home and read about another 10 or 15 of them. Not all of them, it's too much. Nobody expects you to read about all of them. But if you do the minimum, then you only know the 5 from the lecture, and that's not very much. And if you write about 2 of them and you misunderstand one of them, then you understand only 50%. Is that really enough to pass? The teacher is thinking this. Is this really enough to show that the student has understood? If you write about 5 and you misunderstand 2, then the teacher sees that the student understands 60% of them. It's better, but is it still enough to pass? And if you can show that you understand something that was not in the lecture, that shows deeper understanding. That shows more work on your part, and that is definitely better. So the things you need to remember from this lecture is, if you want to get higher grades, focus your writing on higher order thinking skills. Show that you understand complex ideas from multiple perspectives, and always use good quality evidence to support your opinions. Don't use websites, use good quality research papers like journal articles, something that has been peer evaluated. And thank you very much for paying attention. I hope this helps everybody.